Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. And with baseball in full swing and football season around the corner, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores, even live in-game betting. From Major League Baseball to UFC to tennis and NFL futures, BetOnline remains your choice for sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. Head to betonline.ag today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. Penn State fans, are you feeling confident that the Nittany Lions can win college football's national championship next season? Lock in your futures bet at betonline.ag today. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. Today, I am joined by Mike Poorman of statecollege.com, longtime Penn State professor within the College of Communications, one of my earliest mentors I was very proud to have once I was attending Penn State University. And today, I want to talk about a recent article that you, Mike, wrote on statecollege.com, talking about a little bit behind the numbers, what's going on with James Franklin now that he's entering his 12th season with Penn State. Obviously, he's had a lot of success. The expectations are through the roof for the 2025 season. But I want to start off, what's the general feeling in State College right now about James Franklin and Penn State football?
I think I'll take the second one. About Penn State football, it's off the hook. I came back for an extra semester of fall of '82. Got a second degree, but to cover Penn State football that season. And the energy going into that '82 season, and then I think in comparison, going into '86, when you had 14 fifth-year seniors coming back, it's that high. In fact, I've been working on a story, and then a little less going into '94. '94 was not a surprise, but I've been working on a story comparing 25 preseason to '82, '86, and '94. It's there. It's an all-out hype alert that I haven't seen for a long, long time, and justifiably so, about Penn State football.
Especially surrounding James Franklin, what's the vibe in town?
I think folks are feeling as good almost as they ever had since the Big Ten championship game in 16. But I will, I think there's still a little bit of that Heather Dinich, what she had said the other day. It's essentially, James still has to prove it to us. So there's still some of that. But there's not rooting against James by any sense of imagination.
Your piece came out earlier this week on statecollege.com. I believe you called him James Franklong, basically just his longevity and his consistency at Penn State. And it was incredible reading the story in that, it's Kirk Ferentz and James Franklin in terms of staying power within Big Ten coaches at this point in time. And then also to think back that in the span of 28 months, there are 4 different head coaches for Penn State football surrounding the time when James Franklin was officially hired in 2014. When you think about that 28-month span, how crazy was that in terms of obviously so many things happening with the sanctions, the fallout of the Sandusky scandal, but then the hire of James Franklin, his arrival, and him also realizing what he had to fix at Penn State?
Well, it's been really, it was, that's counting interim Tom Bradley for a couple games, O'Brien and Larry Johnson for, I think, was a ham sandwich and then an egg salad sandwich as the interim after OB left. But, and I didn't put this in the story, but I think this is the essential personal side of it. James has really come of age. He's really matured. I went back and looked at photos that I took of the first press conference, and he was a kid, and his kids were little kids. I think, he's grown into the job as a statesman. He used to wear, when he came here, his emotions on his sleeve. Like, he would come over and see someone, a reporter on the sidelines before practice, me, and like give him a hug. And now it's barely acknowledging someone's there. He's grown into the job. But the genesis for the story actually came from James. A couple things in the spring, a couple times, some of them, one was at the Sports Business Conference where student run, and he was a speaker, and he brought that up very early about his continued long-term tenure and compared it to, and I did the fact check of, he said in his time were 2 Big Ten teams that had 6 head coaches in the time that he's been at Penn State. I did my fact check and go, Jimmy's right, and then built a story around that. That's the thing about James, is sometimes he'll give you nuggets that if you do the work, they're a broader story. And I think he's number 8 in all of college football as for the longest tenure. And the interesting thing about that to me, again, I try not to write too long these days. Only one of the people before him, Dabo Swinney, has won a national title. People like the Sabans of the world, and Kirby Smart has not been at Georgia as long as James. So winning a national championship is important, but sustained success in a lot of ways is just as important.
You're talking about the hype around town and thinking back to those years when Penn State last won national championships. It's been nearly 40 years. And it's so interesting, Mike, in that I remember entering the 2023 season, there was a lot of hype, but it felt different. It didn't feel as true. And that I think so much of the hype was pinned on Drew Aller. And I don't know if it was true hype or true belief that this team could win a national title in 2023. There were certainly people saying that. But once you saw the product on the field, you're like, this is a very good team, but it's not that good of a team. This doesn't feel that way at all. It doesn't feel like it's pinned on one thing in particular. It feels like true belief in the core, and then also looking around the grander landscape of college football. There's a chance to compete. There really is no true juggernaut that people can foresee going into 2025. First of all, I want to focus on Drew Aller there. That maturation process that you've seen for Drew Aller from his first days as the starter to now, what have you seen?
Well, I think the thing with Drew, and go back to 23, I think people, I don't want to compare him to McKenna, who's the news of the week, the hockey player who just signed with Penn State. But people were pinning huge hopes on him because they were comparing him to Sean Clifford, who was right, who was consistent, and at Penn State a long time, was maybe great, but not elite. And you really do need an elite quarterback to go with your head coach. I think actually losing to Notre Dame for Drew's long-term development as a college quarterback, but also as a pro quarterback was good. It broke him down. It created some humility. It fueled his drive. It told him that he needed to be maybe even less emotional and more focused um, I understand more of his classes are online than in person, which enables you to spend more time on football. So had they won that game, had they maybe won the national championship, it's very likely he would have turned pro. Not saying that he would have, but had he could have ended up being, and I like this person, he could have ended up being Christian Hackenberg, leaving a year too early. So in this sense, I think folks may not look at it that way, but in some ways, for Drew himself and then Penn State writ large, because when Bo left, when Bo announced he was leaving, which seems decades ago, Drew still had not made the decision that he was staying. So I think that's the silver lining.
There was that very real scenario that James Franklin has talked about publicly, that he could have been out of Bo Perbula and Drew Aller in the span of maybe a week, 2 weeks, and then also to include the likes of Nick Singleton potentially in that conversation, Katron Allen potentially in that conversation. This team would look completely different. Going into this season, the biggest change on the staff, Jim Knowles obviously coming on as defensive coordinator. There were losses with the roster, obviously off to the National Football League or elsewhere. How do you feel about what the defense can be in 2025, given that turnover and the addition of Knowles?
I think it can be great, maybe elite. The secondary is fabulous. You can't deny how important getting Knowles was. Allen was terrific, but Knowles is next level. There's still some question marks. Getting Campbell, in some ways, you can say was almost as important as getting Knowles. Rojas, and he'll be the first person to tell you, last year was not a great year for him. And as much as Don DeLuca is a great guy and plays way beyond perhaps what his abilities, linebacking would have been a weakness for Penn State. So those two. James had an incredible offseason. Another story I got cooking. James's offseason, the retention, the hiring of Knowles, getting every available wide receiver short of that kid from Virginia who went to Notre Dame for $1 million. Those were all great off-season moves by James. I'm not even sure I answered your question.
No, that's okay. Obviously, there's a lot with this, but I think the roster defensively, while there is talent you lost, so you can't look past losing Abdul Carter, there will be questions at defensive end. There will be questions in terms of the depth at defensive tackle, the performance at linebacker, but there is some security with that secondary to the points that you raised. I'm curious to see the transition process under Jim Knowles, because I believe it was a press conference that you were attending. Jim Knowles was talking about using Wayne Gretzky as an example, and that Wayne Gretzky went to where the puck was going to be, not where it was, and that's what made him a great scorer. And he said developing that trust with the roster so that they believe that when he calls something, not for me to call it blind faith, but just say like, hey, just trust that I know the ball is going here and you just have to react. So how long do you think it might take for us to see this defense round into form because of the potential losses and the addition of Jim Knowles?
Well, I think September 27th, which is a long way away. A couple of things there. Yeah, I do think D tackle is still a question. I saw something where who's the transfer D tackle who got hurt last
Alonzo Ford from Old
Yeah,
Dominion.
Ford, he has great potential, but he has 30% body fat. That's not really super agile. So I think the interior D line, DDS is fabulous, but he has to mature into a controlled nightmare and a leader. And I think that's the next step that they're really going to need for him. But to answer your question, yeah, when you open with Bald Eagle, Penns Valley, and Bellefonte for your first 3 games, you're really not going to be tested. So I think the whiteout will be the first clue. I asked Knowles the first day, I go, which is it? The Jimmies and the Joes, or the X's and the O's? And he goes, oh, you're an old guy. I haven't heard that question forever. So Knowles may have great X's and O's, and I believe that he does. But the question is, are the Jimmies and Joes, especially what you talked about, the interior D line and the second and third linebacker, are they good enough to trust and be where they should be? Your Gretzky analogy via Knowles is a good one.
Looking at offense, the offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, flirted with the West Virginia head coaching job back for this season. Do you have any expectation that he would stay with Penn State beyond 2025?
Great question. Depends what jobs are open. He's making a decent amount of cash. They win the national title,
Cash in,
yeah, they'll find some extra money. I know his family loves it here. I think it's at least 50-50. I think one thing, I sound like James now, one thing that no one's talking about is Trout's still here. He could have been the guy instead of Tyler Bowen at Ohio State. No one talks about that. So they got a guy who had coached at Penn State, just not their first choice. Trout, imagine if Troutwine had gone to Ohio State. That would have been a hell of a trade with Knowles, which I think, again, I'm not going to answer. I think I answered your question, but the other thing people aren't talking, this offensive line has great potential. So when you talk as we did about the 82 team, or the 82 teams offensive line, or the 81 teams with Munchak and Farrell and Romano, or the 94 team where everybody in that offensive line was drafted and some of them played in the pros forever. That's a great offensive line, whether they're blocking for you and me or Katron and Nick. So I think that's going to help Andy look really good, and will continue to. He won't have to be as fancy as he tried to be last year, i.e., inside the 5, against Ohio State.
Yeah, I was going to say Vega Ioane going in motion a ton is like, you might still see that, which there's that possibility, but no, I saw recently.
Just run a sneak behind him. I mean, one guy's 350 pounds, Drew 6'5", 6'6", 240.
I think I saw recently our friend Landon Tangwall, who does a tremendous job with his YouTube channel, posting the dreaded 4th and 5 from years ago against Ohio State at Beaver Stadium and showing why it didn't work and all those sorts of things. And then it's just this luxury that Penn State has enjoyed the last handful of years with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, is that you can really just line up and have some road graders, and you don't need to rely on too many other bells and whistles. And granted, we saw just about every bell and whistle last year from Andy Kotelnicki. Part of that was the deficiency from the wide receivers and trying to make up for that. But it just doesn't feel like that will be necessary. You'll probably still see it from Kotelnicki, but time will tell. The one thing I loved about your article talking about James Franklin's longevity is talking about Terry Smith. And we're biased on State of State. Justin King, Terry Smith is his stepfather, so we always speak very glowingly of Lockdown U, the defensive backs. But the more I've thought about it, I do wonder, is Terry Smith irreplaceable to James Franklin at this point in time?
I'm all in on Terry Smith for so many reasons. He gave great insight into James, I thought, for the article. And I told Terry, it was just him and I. And I said, when I really want honest insight on things that have a broader sense and even a historical basis, I will go to Terry. And so if I'm going to Terry for that stuff, right? And Terry's measured, Terry knows Penn State football, Terry knows Pennsylvania football. Terry was a player, so Terry knows Letterman. Even though James is 20 Letterman in the program, no one knows Letterman better than Terry. Terry's a former captain, and Terry speaks honestly. So if I'm going to Terry for that stuff, damn sure that James Franklin is going to Terry for that stuff. And so I think that as much as anything, plus Lockdown U, Terry's pumping him out. I think that's really important, especially with the departure of Brent Pry. Brent Pry did those things for James because James knew Brent since James was a quarterback at East Stroudsburg, and one of the coaches there was Brent's dad. So I think that's a really undervalued rule. Here's the other thing I think that Terry does is Terry's able to speak with Letterman back channel. So he gets a sense of what they're thinking, but he can also put out the message. James is great with Letterman, who have been at Penn State in one way or the other since 13. But if there's a little hole in James's swing, and he's correcting it, Gattuso's a great addition for all the reasons I just said about Terry. Terry can provide that value, but Terry can also provide that out externally among the Lettermen, standing up for James.
Yeah, depth and range, it feels like, in terms of the years.
Yeah, so you're right on. Even and Justin's a home run, but if there was not that connection, I still believe about Terry.
Lastly, I'm so curious always, boots on the ground, the vibe around town, that sort of thing, because of the hype, the expectations, the hope going into 2025. And I like to phrase it as I think Penn State can credibly contend for the national championship this year. But I'm always so curious if in town there's a boom or bust feel surrounding this team, and James Franklin talking about in your article, his Achilles heel has been against the top 5, despite averaging 10.4 wins over 8 full seasons in the past, excluding the COVID year, of course. But it does feel to me that it's not going to be a riot if James Franklin can't get over the hump to a national championship. But there is this feeling from the outside looking in that Penn State is certainly going all in terms of spending, the transfer portal, roster retention, staff retention, all those sorts of things. Do you get that same feeling? Is it all in for James Franklin and Penn State in 2025?
If Penn State does not win the national championship, but even goes 10-2 and makes 2 rounds of the playoffs, I think folks will be happy. To be happy about James in that scenario, Ross Dellinger had a stat that Franklin's lost 13 straight games against top 5 teams. So whether Oregon's going to be top 5, Ohio State definitely will be. Big noon, November 1. And then whoever, if there's a Big Ten title game, and if you make rounds 3 or 4 he's going to have to beat, Penn State's going to have to beat a top 5 team. So if Penn State doesn't win the national championship, but does beat 1 or 2 top 5 teams, that's good enough. But if they don't beat a top 5 team, then that big game James moniker is going to be a tough one for him to wear, not necessarily for Penn State football overall to wear.
And considering how the nucleus of the roster and parts of the staff could be heavily affected come 2026. So not saying it would be a rebuild or any of that sort of thing. I don't think you would see a tremendous drop off, but it will certainly be a big difference in terms of what Penn State is able to field. So time will tell. Mike, thank you so much. Please check out Mike Poorman's work on statecollege.com and beyond. It's a tremendous job. Has been a mentor to me for many, many years, dating all the way back to my time at Penn State. I won't say how long because that'll age us both. But Mike, thank you for everything you've done for me throughout my career, and thank you for hopping on the show.
Thanks for having me on. And I have to tell you, and this is true, those watching, my right hand is up. I'm a regular listener of the pod. You guys are great. I'm a daily walker, hiker, and you're on my super high rotation list. Sometimes it's a crowded marketplace of people putting out pods about Penn State football, but you guys know your stuff, and it's also fun. So, unsolicited endorsement.
Appreciate that very, very much. Be safe on your next walk, and thank you for joining us here on State of State.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month. You can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.